Welcome to Indy Xamarin. This is our monthly meetup. We meet on the fourth Wednesday of every month, except generally for December. We're Indy's largest Xamarin meetup, which is very exciting. We talk about mobile development with Xamarin, but also just things that are related to mobile development. So not always Xamarin, but things that might benefit a Xamarin developer or a mobile developer in general. We're brought to you by Sandy Solutions, Launch Fishers, mFractor, and RevDebug. And by the way, mFractor finally is available for Visual Studio 2022. So that's exciting. I noticed that. That was very cool. So yay. If you don't have mFractor, go get it. It's very cool. Already said thank you to our sponsors. I don't know if anyone's looking for jobs or has a job to offer. I know we're hiring. I work for Klipsch. You know, we're looking for backend .NET developers, Xamarin developers, basically C#. So C# developers, yay. So if you're looking, just hit me up in the chat. Microsoft is always hiring. I imagine, you know, you could ping Christos. You know, I think it's like careers.microsoft.com or something.
That's right.
But yeah. So Microsoft is a cool place to work. I got a lot of friends that work there. It's pretty cool, and you'll hear them say one Microsoft all the time. So tonight's presentation, thank you, Christos, for coming back. Christos Matskas. I don't know if I said that right, Christos. Was I close?
Perfect.
Perfect. Awesome. That's the way it should be. So Christos will be talking about accessing Azure resources securely from Xamarin Apps. Christos works over at Microsoft and is a senior program manager. Very excited for his presentation tonight. We ran into some issues last month, so we rescheduled it for this month so that everything could be all set. And he even went out of his way and bought a brand new laptop so that he could do his presentation tonight. So now you know how much we pay our presenters. which is zero.
Zero.
We pay them.
I'll be invoicing you later. Trust me, there will be some cost here.
Yeah, just send it to me. Send it to me. You know what? If you want a pair of Klipsch speakers or headphones, let me know. I will hook you up. That I can take care of you on.
Thank you very much, man. It's all good. It's all
we
good.
make great stuff. All right, shameless plug aside.
That was a good plug.
We are also part of the .NET Foundation and, of course, the .NET Foundation Virtual User Group. If you have not checked that out, please do. It is very cool. It's on Meetup. And without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Christos, you can start presenting.
Sounds good. We've got someone in the lobby.
Yep, I'll go let them in.
Sure. Your responsibility. Mine is just to present.
I'm going to turn my camera off and go for it, friend.
Thank you very much. Can everybody see my slides? Let me just quickly check here.
I can see it.
Anyone? Cool. Okay. Well, that's a great first step. We can actually all see my screen, which is fantastic. Now, I want to talk about security, and in particular security with Xamarin, because these days all I do is security. In fact, yesterday I was recording 6 episodes back-to-back on the Channel 9 studio about DevOps and security and how they all fit together. As you can imagine, I'm pretty passionate about security. I want to help developers build better, more secure software. And in my spare time, I am a budding triathlete. If you like what you see and you want to see more, we have the 45 show, which is a live stream on Twitch. You can catch us live on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but we also have a lot of content for you to watch on demand. And we cover everything: DevOps, apps, infrastructure. These days we focus on identity governance, how that affects developers like JIT and PIM, which are all cool terminologies around just-in-time access and privileged access management. And we have thematic work that we do every so often, but the goal is to help you build better software. We also have a Discord. So if you want to learn and interact with us and our support teams, you can definitely reach us on Discord. I will share the link at the end of the show. But why is security so important? Well, as the next slide says, we don't want you to store your users' passwords or your users' credentials. Identity management is hard, I'll tell you that. We have 1,500 people working in our division day in, day out to build an identity system that you can benefit from. And you can certainly benefit from this because first, you don't have to build it. Secondly, you don't have to maintain it. And thirdly, it's very easy to integrate. But every week, we hear about a new company making the news. Just 2 weeks ago, we heard about GitHub and Travis CI and NPM having issues because somebody managed to get an OAuth token that would give them access to internal resources. So it's not always a username and a password, but it is how people manage credentials, and we don't do a good job. In fact, we make everyone's life, everybody out there that's trying to hack you, their lives are extremely easy. All you have to do is just go to GitHub and start searching for web configs, app settings.json, and files that are pertinent to each individual framework, so you can find where people dump and commit and make available through GitHub sensitive information. Now, if you haven't heard about Troy Hunt before and the Have I Been Pwned website, then this is where I got the numbers in the middle. These are all the owned accounts that were hacked in the last 10 years. Troy is actually collecting all the information and has a website where you can go and register your email address and find whether your email address was ever part of a hack. But the important thing here, or the serious thing here, is that we have systems out there that expose that information directly or indirectly. And that's 11 billion accounts, if I know my millions and billions. So you can imagine how many websites. Like, we have 591 websites that have been owned and 114,000 pastes that were made available in the dark web or the normal web. So it's scary. People screw up. I screwed up as well. I've committed clear passwords on GitHub. I did it on my blog one day, and then I woke up the next day and I had 30,000 emails that were sent out from my SendGrid account. And I was so excited because I thought I went viral, when in reality, all I did was just commit my password to SendGrid in my GitHub repo, in a public repo, and a bot picked it up and they used it to send 30,000 emails. I was glad I was in the free account, and I was glad that there was a hard stop. Otherwise, it could have been abused. But that was a fairly innocuous thing to happen. Imagine financial data in an insecure storage account somewhere in Azure, and that's another story from another customer. So we definitely get it wrong. So what can we do? Well, I would say, for starters, please do not create your own identity systems because they're so easy to hack. I built my own back in 2007, and what I thought it was going to be a simple user table with a couple of fields ended up taking maybe 2 days to implement everything end to end. It took me weeks to actually build something that was not nearly as robust as I thought. So there are solutions out there. There are cloud solutions out there that will allow you to easily integrate identity into your systems so you can focus on the things that really matter, like creating awesome UIs or solving business problems. I work for Microsoft, so obviously for me it makes sense to promote Azure Active Directory. But if you cannot use Azure Active Directory, there are other products out there. I urge you to do that. The nice thing about most .NET developers is that you're most likely working with Azure and Microsoft 365, and therefore your organization already has an Azure Active Directory for you to use straight out of the box. And the nice thing about Azure Active Directory is that it scales. As you can see, we have 30 billion daily authentications. Let me hide this because you shouldn't be seeing that. 30 billion daily authentications. So this system can scale. And you might not be in the millions or the billions or the thousands, but the fact that you can start writing code that can scale from 1 user a day to 30 billion users a day, which would be a fantastic problem to have as a business, just goes to show that there's a platform out there that can support your business growth. And the fact that you also don't have to think about how is this going to work. So when your manager comes next time and says, we're building a brand new app and we need to be able to sign in users, whether they're internal or external, you don't have to ask whether you already have a solution, because, as I said, if you have Microsoft 365 and if you have Azure, you have an Azure Active Directory already. If not, you can get one for free in the developer tenant, and then if you see that this is the right solution, you can buy the appropriate license for your size of organization. Next question obviously would be how easy it is to integrate. I will show you how easy it is, whether you're creating APIs, a .NET web app, or whether you're building a Xamarin app. It doesn't take too much. In fact, it takes very few lines of code to integrate everything. And then does it support and integrate with the platform that I use? Today I'll be using Rider, and Rider has an awesome Azure Active Directory extension, which we built together with the JetBrains team to make your lives easier. If you're using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or the CLI, we also provide you with the tools to do it out of the box. And so far we talked about signing in, but there's a slew of other features that come out of the box for you to use. Let's say multi-factor authentication. If you've ever had to implement multi-factor authentication, then you know that it is super hard. You have to rely on other services like email and SMS, and SMS is not safe anymore. So now you have to start integrating with authenticator apps, and you can see that you already have a whole piece of work in front of you that you didn't anticipate. Then you have conditional access. How can you manage access to your resources? We have continuous access evaluation, which is once a user leaves the company and their account is not available anymore on Azure Active Directory, how can I eliminate access via their access token? Because if I sign in today, Outlook will probably go and refresh my access token. It will say, well, it's valid for another 10 hours. Awesome. So for the next 10 hours, even if my manager calls me and says you're fired, I still have access to my emails. It's very hard to invalidate tokens that have been issued. Well, now with continuous access evaluation, you as a developer get it for free out of the box. You don't have to write any code. It will be implemented straight through Azure Active Directory. So we already talked about MFA, conditional access, and continuous access evaluation, which are things that you never thought about until now. And probably you don't have to think about because you're a developer. So what we're trying to do is reduce friction. We want to help the users sign in with what they have, whether they're an organizational user that use Azure Active Directory. So if I sign into my laptop, I don't want to have to sign in again to my Teams and again to my Office and again to my Outlook and again to access internal websites. I want single sign-on, which is very important. Reducing friction means that you can have better success in product adoption. We want to give easy access to organizational data. So anyone that signs in through Azure Active Directory can also request access to internal resources, whether it's documents or Teams or emails or having to interact with other objects. Complying with IT is super, super important. I mentioned that before. You, as a developer, you build an app, 10,000 users in your organization use it, and then IT says, well, we only want people to be able to access the resources that this app is enabling if they're in a VPN, because that's very important. Now, how are you going to implement that as a developer? It's not easy, but if IT applies the policies, these policies will trickle down to your code without you having to write any single piece of code. That's it. And finally, safeguarding access. We got single sign-on, we got MFA out of the box, and then we have strict policies that can be applied throughout the process that can ensure that only people that should have access at the right moment can do that. And these are the benefits that you get out of the box. Like I haven't shown you yet, but you will see that with very little code, you can achieve that. So when it comes to integrating with the platform, there are two things that you need to be aware of. One is your app registration. If you've ever had to use Google or maybe Facebook or Twitter to interact with their APIs, you have to create an app that shows your intent and you're explaining what you're going to do. It's exactly the same thing for Azure Active Directory. You create an app registration that you declare that you are planning on using Azure Active Directory for, say, a web app or a mobile app or a desktop app to authenticate, and then maybe get access tokens and access other resources. So once you create your app registration, either via the portal or programmatically through the Microsoft Graph API, then all you have to do is add a little bit of code. Now, ideally, if you are using Azure Active Directory, you can use one of our libraries. the MSAL library, the Microsoft Authentication library. We have MSAL libraries for most of the major frameworks out there. So .NET, Java, Python, Node now, and front-end apps like or SPAs like React and React and Angular. These are all supported for you. But if you don't want to use those, you can use any other open source library that supports OAuth and OpenID Connect. In effect, our endpoints are built to support OIDC certified libraries. In some cases, you may have to go back to Azure Active Directory to configure APIs, or somebody else has configured an API and you just need to get access to it. So you need a separate app registration for every endpoint that needs to authenticate and validate tokens. Supported identities, that's a great question to ask when it comes to building apps, because we sometimes build applications that are only consumed by internal users, and then sometimes we want to build apps that are consumed by external users only, like somebody that needs to come to our shop and buy a t-shirt. In that case, we don't want them to have a Contoso account or a Microsoft account. They need to have Microsoft.com account. They need to use their own email, or they might want to use their Facebook account to sign in. So we want to support these scenarios. So when it comes to making a decision, that's the first thing that you need to start. Who's signing in? My users or external customers? If it's internal users, then you use Azure Active Directory. If it is external users, then you use Azure Active Directory. B2C. B2C, it's business to consumer or business to customer, whatever you want it to mean for you. And we enable these scenarios. There are scenarios in between, however, which I don't want to cover right now, but they can complicate things like business to business, where you have an Azure Active Directory external to you trying to sign into your Azure Active Directory. So that's a business to business to enable these scenarios. And you also have external identities, like I want to join Microsoft as a vendor for 3 months. They're not going to give me a Microsoft.com account. They will say, well, which account do you want to use? I will say, I will use my Gmail account. And that becomes an external identity, which means that I can be onboarded onto an Azure Active Directory, but I don't have to have an account like that. And these are all built on top of open standards. In fact, Microsoft is contributing to open standards like FIDO and SAML and Scheme and OAuth 2 to help make the community better. We want to make it easier for everyone. So the big difference with B2C is obviously instead of having the standard redirect that you go and sign in somewhere that looks and feels like Microsoft, you can make the experience a lot more integrated and consistent with your apps. And therefore, you can customize the backgrounds, you can customize the sign-in, you can customize the look and feel of your app. We have templates to allow you to do that. But it is a lot more immersive, and it makes your customers feel like they're still within your application, even though they're using a third-party authentication service. There you go. So this is, again, another way to show you how you can enable different scenarios. And B2C allows you to build some very complex solutions. You can have a front end or multiple front ends authenticate to Azure Active Directory B2C, and they can call other APIs and other services that are protected. They do not allow you to get access to internal data, and there's no access to MS Graph if you're wondering. And I will do a quick demo about Graph later on. So let's do a quick demo about authenticating users with Azure Active Directory B2C. So this should work. Why is this open here? There you go. So I have my emulator, and here I have 2 apps. I think this one is the Azure AD. Let's find out. No, it is my B2C. So the application launched, and I wanted people to sign in first before they can access anything else, but you can change that. So you're presented with a sign in. Do not judge me on my design, because I am awful at that. I am more of a functional backend developer rather than a nice UI kind of a guy. So if I ever have to build something that is to sell or make it appealing, I will work with a designer. And I've done in the past in different jobs. So here I'm going to sign in with my, but before I do that, let me just, you can see that I can sign in with all these accounts. These are all supported, but I want to sign in with my my email, because I said, you know what, I don't want to use my social media accounts, but we can test that later if you want, just to prove the point. And then here, I want to do my password. It's Hunter 2, in case you're wondering, with an exclamation mark to make things work. And all the application does is make sure that I can sign in, and then go and get my ID token and crack it open and present it to you. This is very simple. The only reason why I kept it as simple is because I wanted to show you the actual code that it takes to build this. So this is my Azure Active Directory, which is their own one, and I want to have my B2c one. There you go. So it is a Xamarin application. Let me see if I can zoom in. There you are. And most of the code is actually in my shared project. So here, as the application starts up, I'm instantiating a public client application. Now, mobile apps are not trusted because anybody can download the code and crack it open, so we cannot have any secrets. So there's no trust between the mobile app and the backend or Azure AD. And that creates a challenge as well, because, for example, if I want to access data into my storage account, or if I want to access data in my SQL server, I don't want to have to put all my secrets in here, right? I don't want to have my connection string or my storage key here, because that exposes all the information. Ideally, if you're building these kind of applications and you want them to scale, you keep your front end fairly lightweight without doing too much logic, and you push the business logic into, and the security component into an API, like an Azure function or an API that runs on Azure. And what you do is, instead of calling directly into your backend Azure resources, you go via the API, but you still authenticate on the front end, and you still authenticate between the front end and the back end. So you sign in, and then you acquire an access token for your API, and then you send that token with every request that you need to access your storage or your SQL data. So here it's a public client. We're not trusted. It's a public client. It stores some information in the iOS keychain to make sure that you can benefit from things like single sign-on. And then we define which authority we have, where is our B2C, and where should we receive our authenticated tokens. So that's the redirect URI. Some of the information is actually stored in constants. You can use a file, or you can use something else, but there's nothing sensitive here. As you can see, the most important information is our tenant ID, which again points to where our code lives, or where the Azure Active Directory is. So when we get redirected, it goes there. We have a sign-in policy that explains how we want people to sign in. And this is where we light up things like Twitter and Google and what have you. And finally, we have some scopes to request. And these are technically just the OpenID and offline access, which means I can sign in and I can get a refresh token for later. That's all it is. Oh, look at that. Yeah, it's a client ID. I think that's a secret. But you guys are not going to hack me, are you? I trust you. This is recorded as well. So I will do all my keys. You've already done it. Perfect. Yep, Thank you.
Already hacked you.
Please stream on my behalf, because I haven't streamed in a while. So if you get access to my client ID, just make sure you do that. I think this is not a secret, by the way. I think this is just defining the client ID for Twitch, so people can sign in with their Twitch account if they want to. So it's like a tenant ID, which is not secret. But I now know who my real friends are, because you jumped at the opportunity to hack me. Okay. So we have the constants, which define things that are consumed by our app XAML here in the startup. And then the only thing that we do is we redirect people to the login page. So in the login page, right, so let's count how many lines of code we have. We have 6 lines of code, okay? Nothing else here. And then in our login page, this is where the magic happens. When somebody clicks on the button, we redirect them to the browser so they can sign in. And then when the result comes back, we actually take them to the login result. So we have, how many lines of code we have? So we do a little bit of a check here, because if the user has already signed in, we don't want them to sign in again. So technically, this is not a sign-in. This is more of a, hey, I already have an account in my cache. Go and get a token for them. And we'll try to do it silently, so there's no interaction with the user. But if it doesn't find any accounts, it will say, you know what, you need to actually present the page so the user can click on the login button so they can get to the process. So we had 6 lines of code before, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 only because I want to look nice. Otherwise, I could actually chain them into one line. But let's say another 6 lines of code, 12 lines of code to get all the authentication working. I mean, you can count the constants if you want, but I will let that slide. And then in the end, the login result, all it does, in effect, it's grabbing the authenticated context. It grabs the token from the authentication result and loops through the claims. In effect, it looks into the permissions, it looks into the token claims just to present something to us. We don't have to do that. At this point, the user has already authenticated. We know who they are, and now we know what they can do within the application. That could be what kind of permissions do they have? When did they sign in the last time? How long do we want to keep them signed on for? And all these things. And then obviously, if we want to grab some data, we can pass them in. There's some logic in here because the tokens that we get back from external providers are slightly different. So I'm doing a little bit of a business logic here to render the data appropriately. But that's all that is. So technically 12 lines of code, which I made them look nice. They could be a lot less, just to get the authentication working in your application. As you can see, I think it wasn't too much of an effort, right? There's a little bit of configuration for Android in the main activity, and that is to allow for MSAL to actually hijack the window and redirect, and also for the results when they come back, what to do with them. This is all very well documented in the official docs. And I do have a blog that explains how to do them, plus a video. So if you want to look at that, I'll be happy to share the links afterwards. So that's all it is. 6 lines of code, and now my app can authenticate and check the user and find the information. In fact, let's go back to the application just to prove a point. So I will log out. And I will try to log in again. And this time I will try to log in with my Twitter account. So this takes me to Twitter, and then okay. And now I don't remember my password. Or do I remember my password? Let me see. I just don't want to get myself hacked here because that will give you access to my account. Yeah, I can probably stop sharing for a second. And then I can come back and...
Oh, come on, you can trust us.
Yeah, that is definitely a no. Where's my window that I was... there. There you go. So I know I can trust you, but in the meantime, I don't know if I can trust you.
What are the last 4 digits of your social so we can make sure this is secure?
See, I knew I couldn't trust you.
But that's just me looking out for you.
I think you're onto something. And I also think that I forgot my Twitter password. Oh, you know what? That's because I reset it at some point. Because I guess I did something very similar and stupid, and I did it live. So let's go back to here. Let's go like this. I haven't signed in yet, so just to prove the point, I am going to share again. So hopefully this will work now. And there should be a 2-factor authentication, which is sweet. And by the way, B2c also supports 2-factor authentication. So it's not just me, I just haven't set it up for this app. I want to keep things light and simple. My password is for the 1-factor authentication. Boom, done. And yes, so I haven't signed in this app in a while. Yeah, it works. Now you can see that the token issuer is B2C plus Twitter. The way that this works is super interesting. I sign in with Twitter, and then Twitter says, hey, this is a token for you. And then this token is sent back to B2C. But the actual issuer of the final token is B2C. So you will always see B2C as the final issuer. You can also request that the token that Twitter issues can be passed down as part of the claims of the token So if you need to access Twitter resources once you signed in, you can use that access token to do so. But you are responsible for renewing that token. The B2C token will be automatically renewed as part of website, but your Twitter token will not be renewed because it's not tracked by B2C anymore. B2C says, I have an authenticated user that came from Twitter, and I can pass the token down, but from now on, you're dealing with me directly. So that's something very interesting if you're looking to integrate with third parties. Sometimes it's just the authentication bit, right? I just want to sign in people with Twitter or the social media accounts, and you don't care about anything else. But there are scenarios where you might be building an app that leverages that platform. Like you're building the next Twitter client that is going to be the most awesome Twitter client, and you need to be able to interact. So people not only they have to sign in, but they also need to have access to the Twitter token, and that becomes a little bit tricky. So you have to behind the scenes manage and refresh those tokens. Just an FYI. But as you can see, I didn't change any single line of code. All I said was I just want to sign in with social media accounts, and automatically it works because B2C does all that heavy lifting for you. Any questions so far before I jump back to the slides? Let me see if there's anything in the chat I need to monitor. Okay, there's nothing here.
I didn't think I saw anything in the chat.
No worries, we can carry on as we were. And this is definitely the wrong thing. I don't know why this is opening here. Okay, let's show here. So we did a demo, which was great. Let's see what else we have discussed. And then if you have any questions as I go through, let me know, right? Because I know that's a little bit late for you. I'm going to skip through the slides because this exactly shows what I've shown you in action through the emulator and through the UI, through Rider. These are the gotchas that you need to be aware of. So there are two things that you need to add in the underlying iOS and Android projects to make sure that things don't fall apart. And the next slide is pretty awesome because I like to bring controversy, and there you go. We support everyone everywhere. I'm using Rider, and there's an awesome Azure Active Directory extension. You can be using IntelliJ, that also has an Azure Active Directory extension that we built with collaboration with IntelliJ. And we don't care whether you're running on AWS, Google Cloud, or DigitalOcean, because eventually you have to sign in your users somehow. For certain things, you have AWS built-in capabilities, but for external users or for things that need to sign organizational users, it's not as easy as Azure Active Directory. And again, we don't care about which language you use or how you run your code, whether it's in Kubernetes, serverless, bare metal. We support you across all the platforms. But if you are using the Microsoft Identity Platform then and the Microsoft developer ecosystem, you get a lot more benefits. GitHub has just added support for workload federated identities, which means that you can now run GitHub Actions against Azure without having to authenticate. You don't have to have a password stored somewhere in your settings to authenticate with Azure. Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code do exactly the same thing. They take your account that you sign into Visual Studio, and they use that information to allow you to call Azure services without having to authenticate again, all through the magic of the Azure SDKs. And the Microsoft 365 platform provides a rich platform for storing your data or interacting with emails and automating a lot of processes that can also be run through Azure services. And finally, the Power Automate. They all use identity. Like these are all disparate things. You could be running a hybrid scenario where half of your cloud is on AWS, half of your cloud is on Azure. You could be using all the tools and all the languages you can imagine, but authentication and identity remains constant. This is the only thing that's not going to change. And there's very little things that you can do today that don't require knowing who the authenticated context is. Unless you're running a marketing website with static images, then everything else requires somehow to know who's accessing the apps and what they can do in the system. So, single sign-on, you can get single sign-on out of the box. You don't have to add or configure anything. In fact, my phone, which is my corporate phone, has the exact same apps. And I'm using the emulator obviously here, but if I were to, well, you can do it. Try to sign in now, just thinking about it. If I were to use my apps on my phone, then I get single sign-on here because I already have all my Microsoft apps, and I have a Microsoft profile on this phone. So as soon as you onboard your phone, let me see if that's the right one. As soon as you onboard your phone, then that phone can benefit from single sign-on. That's a massive asset for your apps. Just trying to see if I can showcase that in action. Just thinking about it. Okay. Is this the B2C? I think that's the B2C. That's why it prompted me for a login. Yeah. So I don't want that. I want the other app. I want the other app, which is still thinking about it. I'm going to close it and then launch it again. Because single sign-on is so awesome to show. Or maybe it's corrupt. I was loading it, side loading this earlier, and I think I broke something. I'll let you think about it for a while. Okay, so we'll talk about single sign-on. We talked about supporting all your languages. And if you don't have support for your language, like let's say you're using Perl, you can still write or use a library that uses OpenID Connect. And I don't want to go too much into protocols or flows, but OpenID Connect and OAuth2 is what we use in the industry these days to enable secure authentication, right? We don't want you to give us your username and password for your Gmail account so we can access your calendar. We want you to sign into Google, and then for us to get the right token to go and access your data. Because back in 2007, that's what we used to do, which was awful. Secure by default and building richer experiences with Graph, Azure, and your own APIs. Obviously, a lot of cases will be, I'm building my own API, but your APIs have to access other resources like Cosmos and storage and SQL and maybe MySQL or whatever. So your APIs can benefit from the identity platform as well, because if they're running on Azure or if they're running on Azure Arc supported infrastructure, you get managed identities for free, which allow you to do service-to-service communication without having to pass any credentials. So I can sign into my Cosmos, so my API can sign into my Cosmos database with managed identities, no secrets, just the URL that points to my Cosmos. Same for storage, same for SQL. How many of you have stored SQL connection strings in your configs? I will raise my hand first because I've done it a million times. Every time we go to a customer, we see the same things, passwords all over the place. So if you're creating your APIs to access data, you can benefit from the Microsoft Identity Platform. Your front end can benefit from the Microsoft Identity Platform. Very little code, secretless apps. Everybody's happy. So if you haven't used Microsoft Graph before, then to access internal resources, then you're missing out. Microsoft Graph is a common API. I would be curious to hear how many of you have used Microsoft Graph here. Can anybody put in the chat? Don't be shy.
I have, but it was a few years ago.
But you haven't used it recently?
No, I haven't had to use it.
Okay. Yeah, because we don't always build internal apps, right? We don't build apps that benefit from internal resources, so need to access internal resources. Sometimes it can be line of business apps that just present data from some data store. And I get it. And I know that Microsoft is pushing quite a bit for Graph because it is like the thing, but it doesn't work for all the scenarios. But for the scenarios that it works, it's absolutely stunning. I will give you a very good example. I was writing a mobile app back in 2012, 2013, as part of their Windows apps challenge, where if you created an app that was running, if you created and published a mobile app that could run on Windows Phone, no Xamarin back then. Oh, did I use Xamarin? I think I used Xamarin. You could actually qualify for a Nokia Lumia phone. And I got my 920, if I remember correctly, through that. So I built an app, and I built a password manager app because I wanted to be my password manager app that I trust. And I wanted to store information. Yeah, it was like, it wasn't Silverlight back then. It was actually just after Silverlight, because I think Silverlight died in 2011, 2012, or they stopped supporting it or officially supporting it. It was 2013, if I remember correctly. So, or maybe 13. Yeah, yeah, it was. UAP. You're right. So I built it, and I wanted to interact with OneDrive. I wanted the users to be able to choose how to store their secrets encrypted in a file that would be stored off the phone. So if you ever lost your phone, you didn't lose all your passwords. It made sense, right? So I tried to integrate with OneDrive, or back then it was SkyDrive. Remember back in the day? The amount of code that I had to write.
It was Live Drive originally.
It was Live Drive, but
It was
yeah,
Live
and
and then Sky, and then it
SkyDrive
became One.
and OneDrive. But I think it was in the days of SkyDrive. My memory could be my fault here, but
Because I remember it was called they used Mesh was part of
yes,
their network naming, and
yes.
I still have folders named Mesh.
But did you ever try to log into OneDrive or LiveDrive or whatever they called it? They had their own button. They had their own controls, and they had their own libraries to do all that stuff. And it was an insane amount of code to write. I think I did a blog post at some point just to integrate with OneDrive, the OneDrive of 2012. It was insane. Like I was like, okay, I'm ready to do the backend now. I can store my data. And it took me another like 2 weeks of trying to get my head around that and make it work. Today, you can integrate with OneDrive with 2 lines of code. It's an API called to Graph, right? You sign into Graph, you say, I want to interact with files, or you say, I want to interact with directories, which in effect are, SharePoint directories, but they have the consumer SharePoint, which in effect is the same API, which is perfect. And it's 2 lines of code. In fact, I wrote a notebook, a .NET notebook that runs anywhere, that uploads large files, because I wanted to do a proof of concept for the Graph team on how they can benefit from notebooks. It's just insane, right? So let's go back. Thanks, Aidan, for contributing, man, with the Office Graph, which is great. But yeah, MS Graph is the new kid on the block. Now, if you haven't done anything with MS Graph before, let me enlighten you by giving you a quick tour. So here, if we go to aka.ms, GE, the Graph Explorer, it's a great place to be because you can learn all about Graph and how you can interact with it without even having to sign in. I'm not signed in, and I can say, you know what, run a query. Boom, done. But it obviously can do filters, and you can say, select only certain properties. It's interesting how it's not lighting up now. The demo gods are not liking me. Select. Where's my autocomplete?
Yeah, but the Graph Explorer is such a great tool.
It is. You can say select, and you can say which properties you want to select, and you can add them here, blah, blah, and it will run. Now, you don't know all the APIs, which is fine because we provide you with a lot of APIs.
Yeah,
by the
on
way,
the left.
Yeah, they're on the left. So you can say, I want to look at all the applications I've registered in my tenant. And the nice thing is that you can play with the sample data. You don't even have to sign in to your account. But the biggest beauty of all of that is this, the code snippets, where you can say, hey, I want to run a query. I don't know what it looks like. So you come in here, you run your query in the HTTP pane, and then you come down here and it tells you, you know what? This is the code that you need to create to run the exact same thing.
I remember when this wasn't there.
Yeah.
Just so everybody knows, prior to Graph, almost every team at Microsoft did this all in a different way.
Yes.
And I remember when they were trying to solidify everything, get everyone onto one platform. And if you know I don't know if you know the provisioning platform.
I think I do.
Yeah, like all the Microsoft demo systems, all the accounts that start with like CRM and all that.
Yeah.
So I used to run that system, and we had to reverse engineer your stuff all the time. And so when Graph came out, I finally started looking in Graph first and worked with the various teams. And they're like, yes, we're moving it over to Graph. It's taking forever, but we're moving it over to Graph. And now I can only imagine how much better it is now.
Yes.
Yes. But it was so nice.
Dynamics CRM, Azure Active Directory, a lot of the automation that we do these days is through Graph. Now, a couple of other things that I would like to highlight here. The one is that if you're working with a new API and you don't know which permissions your application needs to request, you can find them here. This is what you need to have access to if you want to interact with applications in your tenant. And if you get to the point that you're like, you know what, I'm ready, I want to test a few things out, but I don't want to, do the authentication bit, which I don't know why, then you can also get an, I don't have an X token because I'm not signed in. Sorry, let's sign in then. Make it more valuable to you guys. I shouldn't say guys, I should say friends, because apparently guys is not as inclusive. I know we're all guys in the call today, but
Yeah, to be fair.
Yeah, to be inclusive.
I did have a question about this when you're done.
Okay, well, ask now while I'm getting my password.
So how does this compare to a solution like AuthZ?
You mean, okay, I can answer that in a second. You threw me off there. I thought it was going to be something else, but it's fine. Where is my authentication? Oh, there you go. I hate Max. Did I tell you that? It's like, I don't hate Max. I hate the fact that I'm context switching all the time and I don't know certain things. So
Yeah.
let's run the query again. So runs the query, and if I get my, so here, and then here, that's my access token. I can actually get my access token, jump into aka.ms. Sorry, it's jwt.ms. If you ever want to crack open any tokens, you can do that here. This is, by the way, a super over-provisioned token. So do not share or play with your production, your actual account token in this instance, because this is a test tenant, it doesn't do anything, but this is an overprivileged token. As you can see, it has a lot of permissions, a lot of scopes, but they're all for the graph. So going back to your question, how does this compare to AuthZ? As I said, I would rather you use an identity service provider out there than you creating your own identity. If you cannot use Azure Active Directory, then I think AuthZ is the next best thing. AuthZ has a much bigger focus on consumer authentication than enterprise authentication.
Yeah.
So now we're comparing AuthZ to B2c. So that's the direct correlation there rather than the whole Microsoft Identity platform.
Right.
So B2c is free for the first 50,000 users. So if you're building an app today that needs to authenticate users, external users, like people come to my shop and they buy something, or I'm the next Walmart, the first 50,000 sign-ins are free. The first 50,000 accounts, because these accounts can sign in indefinitely for that month, and you don't have to pay a penny. After that, there's a scale of cost on how much you need to pay based on how many users you have. I think once you hit 50,000 users, that's a great problem to have in terms of paying, because the benefits that you get in comparison to paying for the 50,000 users totally overweigh the cost. But AuthZ has done a fantastic job in creating a developer-first, API-first mindset. So they're a lot more friendly for the day zero experience when you start and you have no idea what you're doing. B2C is a lot more flexible and a lot more powerful because they have the full framework for creating custom policies. So they have out-of-the-box experiences, and then they have the ones that are fully extensible. So if you are an XML person and you love XML, then you're going to love those custom policies. So it all comes down to preference, and it all comes down to what I think. AuthZ is slightly more expensive to start with, and eventually they even themselves out. So you do your analysis and you find out what you want to build, and then you choose the right provider for you. If you're already on Azure, then the B2C is another resource on your Azure platform. So
okay, and then do you manage all the users through like an Active Directory instance?
Oh, so let me show you how a B2C looks like. So portal.azure.com. Yeah, you see, I haven't done anything in the portal yet. So that's a very good segue into my next thing, which is let's look at the portal. So Azure Active Directory sits on top of Azure AD. Azure Active Directory sits on top of Azure. So you can have multiple Azure subscriptions all tied to the same Azure Active Directory. which is weird, by the way, because you manage your Azure AD inside the portal. So you can see here, I have Azure Active Directory, and the assumption is that the subscription is the umbrella, and Azure Active Directory sits below that, but that's not the case. Azure Active Directory is an object outside of Azure, and therefore you can manage multiple resources. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if I come here and say ad.portal.azure.com, I can sign in directly to my Azure Active Directory without having to go into my portal. And I'll show you that in a second. So you can see this is my Azure Active Directory admin center. And here I could have one or multiple Azure subscriptions I can manage, right? Now here, if I sign in here, let's go to our B2C. But B2C is an actual Azure resource. You can see Azure Active Directory B2C, and that's my tenant. The weird thing now is that it opens in a different portal, just to confuse the hell out of everyone. And trust me, we've talked about this to the big extent about the experience being broken. Because I sign into my B2C, and you'll see all these weird quirkiness. There you go, here. I'm in my B2C. So it looks like Azure Active Directory, but it's not Azure Active Directory. It is it uses Azure Active Directory behind the scenes. So you can actually interact with the graph APIs to manage B2C, but not for providing access to user data. You can only manage the Azure Active Directory objects that underpin the B2C. And I confused everyone now, I know it. But it is an Azure resource that uses Azure Active Directory behind the scenes for storing and for providing capabilities like conditional access and what have you. So the users actually self-manage themselves. I mean, not always, because you can say, I want to invite people to my B2C. I want to send them an email saying, hey, come and sign in. Or I want people, like I have all these people that have signed into my apps. I have no idea where they're coming from. Look at that. This is just super weird. But somebody, like if you access one of my demo apps, you can actually sign up for an account and people can access my running apps if they want to, right? So all the users can self-manage themselves. So there's a number of templates here in the user flows where people can, so if I say a new user flow, people can sign up and sign in. People can edit their profiles. People can reset their passwords if they want to. Again, these are all the tools that you need as a developer to actually build an app that can scale and people can securely password reset, for example, without compromising. Because if you try to do a password reset, good luck trying to protect your account from being hacked or the emails being intercepted and man-in-the-middle attacks and all the things that can happen, or brute forcing password resets and what have you. So you get a lot of things out of the box. But
We have a question.
We have a question. Go for it.
Yeah. So Richard asks, have you had much experience troubleshooting custom policies?
Personally, not so much. Like I've written a few apps, but most of the things I've done were not advanced enough. We do have a team though that really helps with any issues. If you do get stuck, you can go to ak.ms, 425 show help. And this is our developer support team that helps with all the scenarios that you might find. If you are already an Azure customer, you can also get direct support from your account manager. And then we also have dedicated teams that we can escalate to inside my organization that can actually walk you through the experience, or if there are any challenges that specifically block you. Like, for example, you hit a blocker where you try to do something and it doesn't work, then you can do that. In saying that, back to your question, you can use App Insights to give you some useful insights about what is wrong. So there's a very good integration there. And Visual Studio Code has some fantastic extensions to help you with B2C. So there are some tools that can help you get started with troubleshooting. And then once you get stuck and you can't go any further, reach out to us. Or you can have us on Discord. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that takes us to probably the top of the hour. Oh, I have another demo. I have the demo with the Azure Active Directory in this instance. So let's run this one. Let me go back here, and then let's bring this up. So we saw B2C, which was all about signing in users with their own accounts, and now we're going to run it with, no, that's the same one. Okay, I remember now. I need to hit the other one here. So this is an application that uses Azure Active Directory, not B2C, to sign in to my Azure Active Directory, my test tenant, and then grab some information about my colleagues, about what they're doing. And I'm using Microsoft Graph for this. So let's crack it open. There you go. Do you know why it works? Single sign-on, baby. That's why it is. I didn't have to sign in. Now I might remember my account from previous, so it might be in the cast, and that's another reason. But technically, single sign-on is what you experienced here. And in fact, there shouldn't even be a sign-in page, because if you are already signed in, if you already have an account, why do you even need to click the sign-in? You should do it. And this is more for a demo purpose. So if we want to look at the code for this one as well, it's very, very similar. The only thing that we do extra here is actually calling graph. Again, in the app.xaml.cs, our entry point, we create a public client. Remember, we're not trusted. This is not a trusted client. It's not a confidential client. And then we have the auth service, which we offload a little bit to do the work for us. And it doesn't do too much again. It signs in. It tries to find the account. If it finds the account, it will try to grab the token and therefore give us what we need. If we're not signed in, the usual pattern is to throw an MSAL UI required exception. So we'll try to sign in. We find the user, but maybe their token has expired. So this will throw, the acquired token silent will throw if the token is expired. And we capture that. And then we say to the app, you know what, you actually need to interactively get the user to sign in. And this is what we do here. We sign in interactively, and we grab a token as well. So the constants are here. So let's see what we have in the constants. So the scopes are graph scopes. That's why they have this special format. We don't have to include the HTTPS msgraph.microsoft.com or whatever the URL is. Because they're graph, we can directly reference just the permissions. And then the scopes here are user to read, because I need to be able to get my own profile. And then also people to read, so I can look at other people's profiles. And then here in the auth service, we also, I think I have I have just a sign out here. Perfect. So we grab the token, we have the interactive request, it sends back the auth result. And then in my colleague view model, what we do is we use that information to load the data from graph. And the load data from graph, we'll go back just to see how many lines of code we have. But here, we instantiate an HTTP client, not the best practice to instantiate a new HTTP client all the time, but again, demo purposes. And then we add the authorization header with a bearer token. So we need to pass that in. And then we call the graph, which is here. We say, you know what, go and get me the people that I work with. The closest people that I work with, the first 20 people will be the result of the request, and then I just pass the request into the view. I do some transformation. So technically here what we have is, we have the auth result already, so we already have the token in place, and we don't need to re-authenticate. If we look at the authentication requirements again, everything is happening inside here. So 6 lines of code, and I'm being generous because I shouldn't be counting the cards returns as lines, but it's fine. And then the auth service that does a little bit of business logic and looks at certain things, and then it interactively signs us in. So we have so a big difference between Azure Active Directory and B2c is that when it comes to requesting scopes, there is no consent framework. So we cannot interactively say, go and get me all these tokens. Go and get me all these scopes for, say, my APIs or other services. We need to define them and approve them before the user signs in. So we as admins in B2C, we approve them on the user's behalf. In Azure Active Directory, it's very different, because I may not want to give access to the application to look at my calendar, for example, because it's private information. And then the application should be able to handle it accordingly. And you'll notice that because we have the consent framework, there is a little bit of privacy prompt here that we need to capture and make sure that we can work with. But all in all, it's less than 50 lines of code. Okay, and then the sign out is literally 3 lines of code. We remove the actual account and we delete the AuthZ and the current account, and that clears the cache as well. So, I mean, well, we have spaces here. So technically, it's less. Okay, I can expand reducing, so how many lines? 59, 60 lines of code to do the exact same work. And you can lift this code and use it today in your applications. Easy peasy. That's it. These two projects, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. These 2 projects are available on GitHub. So if you want to look at HTTPS, github.com, see Matskas, you'll find the stuff. Hot tip from James last week, Microsoft Extensions HTTP isn't that performant for Xamarin. So the recommendation is, yeah, client factory, that's right. Even on web apps, we don't use HTTP clients directly. We use the factory to pass them into our controllers and methods, and then let them deal with the allocation, deallocation of HTTP clients. That's a good call. That's me. Top of the hour. Do we have any questions? Hey, and everything worked this time. This new laptop.
Yeah, way to go.
I'll be doing a very similar session at Tekorama next year. So no, next year, next month. So if anyone is around and they want to hang out, if you're in Tekorama,
oh my gosh, I'm on the screen.
You are. Oh yeah, you are on the screen. Let me stop sharing. I totally forgot I was sharing. It's fine.
Nice. Does anyone have any other questions? And feel free to unmute and ask questions.
I think a couple of them are fairly late, especially Aiden. Must be like 1 a.m. in the morning. I hope it was worth the wait, Aiden. Don't want to feel bad for keeping you up late at night.
What was the link to that support forum?
Yeah, I will put it here in the chat. So let me aka.ms425 show help. They live to help you. We have 35 developers there in our support team that they want to hear from you if you have any issues. And we have a Discord as well, so aka.ms.
Could have used that about a year ago, but
I know.
moved on now. But my current job, my current work is looking at moving to AD B2c for their authentication. So this has come up at the right time in this project. Even though it's not Xamarin, it's still very helpful.
It is. Obviously, I didn't go into any depth about what B2C can do, but a lot of the capabilities in B2C are fantastic. Like the ability to integrate with other OpenID Connect providers, any provider out there. The ability to even add Azure Active Directory as an identity provider, that really blows people's minds. Where you have, so imagine Walmart, right? They have internal users and they have external users, or whichever supermarket you use. So they don't want to have 2 different authentication portals. What they do is they use B2C for everything. And then Azure AD becomes one of the options to allow you to sign in. So one portal as an entry point, and then you have different providers. And obviously, if you have at Walmart address, I think it is their address, you can sign in as an organizational user and suddenly get access to all the resources that you need. It's pretty cool. And I think we've done a stream on that, on how you can set it up. Fairly advanced scenarios.
Does anyone have any other questions? All right. Well, Christos, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. That was very educational. I certainly enjoyed it. Just so everyone knows, this has been recorded, so we'll make that available on our YouTube channel on Indy Xamarin, and the link will be made available if you go to the meetup site. I usually put it in the comments, and I usually send an email out saying that the video is available, but nice. Practically every time I will put it in the comments.
Cool.
Yay. Okay. Christos, thank you. I hope you'll present again. Be well, be safe, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks everyone. Stay safe.
Yay.
Have a good night. Bye.